Welcome Raymond Lee to the SCA Entrepreneurs Spotlight podcast. Raymond, you started Careerminds. You are still the president there. So we're really excited. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Raymond, would love to start with, you started your business in 2008.
Yeah.
That's a really tough time. You had a career in HR. What gave you the confidence to say in 2008, I'm going to go out on my own and start this business?
Wow. Okay. So 2008 was, we all know, was the recession,
Yeah.
the financial crisis. Um, and when I launched Career Minds, I actually launched it a year prior to that in 2007. This is a story that I haven't told much. And in 2007, when I left my corporate HR job, I approached my manager at the time and said, I have this idea that I want to start a company, but I want you to be our first client. And it was a recruiting company that I launched in 2007. So I went to my boss and said, I'm going to put in my 2 week notice. I'd love to hire my replacement and would love for you to be my first client where I can help staff engineers and any kind of openings that you have across the country. And
Mhm.
this is a manufacturing company, and I worked in their kind of technical division. And she said yes. And, I did such great work there that, she allowed me to go as a contractor. I sort of was able to transition out, start this recruiting business. And it was basically a year later when the recession hit. And obviously, in a recession, you're not recruiting.
Mhm.
Um, they were my first client. I had some other clients. I hired 2 recruiters, and I felt like I was getting some real traction. A year later, one of my clients reached out to me and said that they were going to be having a layoff. And I said, surprise, surprise, it's
Yeah.
join the club. And so
Mhm.
I realized at that moment that things were really shifting. And there was a question that this one client asked me on that phone call. He said, we're having a layoff. Can you do outplacement services for us? And I was like, yeah, I grew up in HR. I know what outplacement is all about. And so this wasn't the company I was working for. This was another company. And I ultimately uh, did the coaching myself, and Career Minds Outplacement from there was born. And it was actually that person who was my first hire
Oh,
because
wow.
he had an educational technology background. He's based here in Philadelphia. His name's Justin Shackleman, and he sort of helped me build out this kind of technology platform that would ultimately be the platform that we deliver today, 20 years later. And so it was interesting because while we started as a recruiting company, I had to quickly pivot because the market was telling us. So
Yes.
the recession was actually a really good time to pressure test a
Hmm.
different delivery model, which for us was a virtual model versus the brick and mortar going into an
Yes.
office, which the industry was, you know, um, had that delivery model was the model for like 30 years.
Yeah. Well, I love hearing that story, and I love hearing from a professional sense, it sounds like everything lined up. You had the first client, you were able to pilot that with, starting with a client. But maybe talk to me about the other side of the equation. You gave up a job, right? You gave up
Yep.
benefits to be a contractor. Who
Hmm.
are some of the other people in your life that either encouraged you to, Raymond, yeah, bet on yourself, go for it. What was that, the other side of the table? What did that look like?
Well, I have to say I didn't have a lot of support
Okay.
because Peter, I was in HR for 15 years, and I got my degree and I started my career and I was growing the corporate ladder. I started out as a HR generalist and, became a manager and then became a director. And I was on a pathway to CHRO,
Yeah.
6 figure plus income.
Hmm.
And so, walking away from that, people were like, but you just spent 15 years in a career and you're right there at the pinnacle of being that executive. And,
Yeah.
I just wasn't fulfilled. So when I was 35 years old and I was going to make the leap of faith. And it was very nerve-wracking because I questioned whether, like, am I making the right decision? And, my wife at the time, she was supportive. She was
Mhm.
working, had benefits. And I would say that that was probably one of the, when I think about support, it wasn't like a cheerleader saying, hey, I got your back kind of thing. It's like, look, I got the insurance coverage and
Mhm.
I have a stable job. So yeah, if you want to dip your toe in entrepreneurship, that's go for it, So I mean, that was the extent of, I would say, the support, but I felt like, hey, now's the time to do it. And so, there was certainly a lot of insecurity early on, when you're an entrepreneur and you're introducing a completely new sort of product in a market that is been the market you've worked in for all those years.
Mhm.
It's kind of like, hey, I was an HR person and now I'm an entrepreneur. There was a little bit of imposter syndrome that I had early
Mhm.
on, and I had to get over that.
Yeah. Well, and being in a corporate, so I came from a B of A where it's very corporate. And then now to
Mm,
be at a smaller business, it's conversations like this, or my mentors have changed. So I'm curious for you, the mentor who would have helped you be that chief, HR executive, was that the same person, or did that have to, how did you get your mentorship being an entrepreneur where that's not the path? Like it's not
yeah.
about, FaceTime, it's about actually getting the work done. How did that
Mm.
evolve?
Yeah, I love that question. Certainly, it was not the mentor for my working years in HR.
Yeah.
Early on, when we pivoted with the Careerminds to Outplacement, sort of like this new virtual outplacement delivery model, I met so we raised some venture capital, and I realized that in order for us to scale, we were going to need some venture capital. And so want to Justin, the person that I hired, he had actually had some capital raising experience, and so we put a deck together and we hit the roadshow. Like we were
Yeah.
pitching investors and learning along the way, and we came across an investor who worked with a guy by the name of Jack Gavin, who ran Right Management for
Okay.
like 20 years. He was from Arthur Andersen, and Right Management is one of the two largest outplacement firms, which subsequently got acquired by Manpower. Well, Jack Gavin, I was introduced to him through one of these investors, and the investor said, I know someone in the industry, and if he says he believes in what you're doing, I will write you a check for $500,000. And it was this is in 2010. So it was 2 years later after the launch when we finally reached an investor who was willing to stroke a check and be our lead investor. And so I got introduced to this guy, Jack Gavin, and I met him in Philadelphia at Duane Morris Law Firm on 17th Street. And we were sitting in this big conference room with this long table, and he was at one end of the table, I was at the other. And I was so nervous because I felt like this meeting is going to, sort of be do or die for our company. And I had my little laptop and I was like, okay, you ready to get started? And he's just sitting there like, okay, let's see this. Let's see what you're building here. It was very intimidating because I think of this guy as the godfather of outplacement, right? He ran Right Management for 20 years. By the way, he sold to to
Oh,
Manpower.
wow.
So
Yeah.
so he's free and clear at this point. Um, and so I did the presentation, I did a demo of the platform, and he leaned back in his chair and he's like, wow. He's like, this is exactly what I was afraid of when I ran Right Management because they had offices around the world. And he said, I was afraid that there would be some guy in a garage building a virtual platform that would completely disrupt the industry. And he said, lucky for me, I sold to Manpower before that happened and made a ton of money. And so he became my mentor, but he also became an investor. And
Wow.
with the 500,000 500,000 I got from that lead, he wrote a check out of his own personal wallet and became an investor, which was huge because
Hmm.
when you're out there trying to disrupt a very traditional market to be able to say, our chairman of our board and investor is the former
Yes.
president of Right Management. I mean, that's a nice conversation. We were interviewed by the Wall Street Journal and a bunch of other media outlets early on that ultimately led to some pretty decent, clients that we were able to acquire. But over the 15 years, Jack was a mentor to me. He kind of taught me about board and governance, op, you know, operating, scaling a business, sales and marketing. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like the investment is one thing, but
Hmm.
to be able to have someone who's, like right at your side, meeting with you every week, kind of helping you navigate some of the trickiest and complex decisions that you have to overcome was pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's a great story. And I imagine now, with your experience, and I know you're involved in a lot of organizations, Philly 100 being one of them, you
Hmm.
almost have that expertise to offer. And he probably didn't spend a lot of his time on Career Minds, but the impact it sounds like he made was huge. What he
Yep.
was able to give to you. So that's
Yeah.
great. So in those early years, it sounds like this was one thing you did right. Really, this was a great move. What are some of the things maybe early on that as you grew in your leadership and running the business that you maybe some early lessons learned?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, it was tough going. I actually just posted something yesterday on LinkedIn that um, like that imposter syndrome, sort of took me down a path of my background is like I worked in human resources, my bachelor's degree psychology. I never, took any, business courses. I didn't go to get an MBA anywhere. So, business and sales and marketing just didn't come natural to me.
Yeah.
I'm a coach. I'm an HR generalist, right? Like
Yes.
I'm a people person. And so
Hmm.
I had to really kind of lean into what it meant to be a CEO. And it was a tough road for me because I just didn't have the skill set. And I would say 3 years into working as CEO, our board of directors felt like we needed a sales and marketing minded CEO who could be, sort of the face of the company. And I was focused on product and operations. And so I actually stepped aside and let this person who is a friend of mine still today,
Hmm.
she's an amazing person and she has a sales and marketing background and her name's Sabrina and she came in and um, basically took over as CEO for like 2 years.
Yeah.
And it was incredible because
Hmm.
what that did for me is I learned basically how to scale, sales and marketing and hire a sales team and build out a marketing strategy. And then she ended up leaving 2 years later to go to work for another opportunity aligned with her background. So it was like
Yeah.
the perfect timing. And then I was able to pitch our board and say, okay, I got this. And
Yes.
they were like, all right, we actually believe that you really do have it. And so I took the reins over 2 years later. So while it wasn't I wouldn't say a misstep, I recognize that sometimes you have to be willing to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I'm going to have to step aside or take a step back. And Adam Grant refers to it as scaffolding. When you're building your career, it
Hmm.
may not necessarily be a linear ladder that goes up. You may have to go sideways and down before you can go back up again. And that was sort of
Yeah.
the scenario that I was in. And oh my gosh, like when I look back, what a learning experience that was.
Yeah. Sounds like those 2 years gave you, 10 years of leadership.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it
great.
totally
Well,
did.
it's funny. I always I'm thankful for Adam Grant because I didn't get into his class. I graduated a year earlier. So, and if I would have gotten his class, I didn't get into his class, and I thought, what am I doing here? I should just
Yeah.
graduate as soon as possible. So I graduated because he did not let me into his class. But
Oh,
and
wow.
I hear you on the imposter syndrome. My career started out in baseball, and I always thought of myself as the kid from the small town in Pennsylvania, not
Hmm.
as hey, I was a fourth round draft pick of the Red Sox. I'm pretty good at this sport. I
Hmm.
always came back to well, I'm just not that good compared to everyone else. And it took years of, no, no, I've got this. Unfortunately, I had good teammates who were very confident, and confidence was not a problem for them. That eventually, you're like, okay, you really have to fake it till you make it on some of this
Yeah,
stuff and really believe it. But
yeah.
no, that's awesome. I love hearing the story. So, as you have grown Career Minds, how has it developed? How has it changed? I know you went through, you sold the business. Maybe talk about the product and that transition from ownership to now being president, but now on the other side of a exit or a transition.
Yeah, there's two, I would say there's two real inflection points that just
Hmm.
stand out immediately.
Yeah.
One is the the moment when we position ourselves for sale.
Yeah.
And we, as I mentioned, we were early to the market. This idea of virtual outplacement, disrupting a kind of brick and mortar delivery model. We were just scaling for, I
Hmm.
would say, 12 years, double digit growth. It was 2019, and our board, they were getting to the point where they were looking for an exit. The VCs were looking for an exit. We didn't see March of 22 coming, obviously. It was our
Yeah.
last board meeting of 2019. And that year of 2020 just completely changed the business. We were primarily North American
Hmm.
in terms of our client base, but when the pandemic hit, those two companies I mentioned, Right Management, the others, Lee Hecht Harrison, they had offices all over the world. And they spent the next 18 months closing offices because of that. And for us, we didn't have any real estate. We were 100%
Hmm.
virtual. Our model was virtual. And so immediately we started getting inbound leads because companies were laying off in Europe and Asia and Latin America. And we were able to very quickly scale our platform into over 100 countries
Wow.
and translate it into 80 languages. And so, and we hired coaches in those countries. When I say hire, we contracted coaches
Yes.
that were working virtually. And so our ability to sort of position ourselves as a true global provider under one brand, we did that over the next 2 years. And ultimately, March of 22, 2 years later, we sold in March of 2020, 2 years later in 22, we sold.
Mm.
So I would say that was the first real sort of inflection for us as an outplacement product. And now,
Hmm.
over the last 4 years since being acquired, the company, the private equity firm that acquired us, has been making investments. And so
Hmm.
we've been investing in various products as well as buying outplacement firms around the world. So we bought one in Canada, we bought one in Australia, we bought one in the UK. So we're really sort of positioning ourselves as a true global provider. But we're also expanding our product base to offer more than just outplacement. So we're more of a category type organization today versus just a product. So I would say
Hmm.
those are the two real shifts that I am incredibly proud and also excited for the continued
Yeah.
growth of the business.
Yeah. Well, it's great, and it's telling about your partner that you're still there. You're there 4 years later. How has your day to day changed? Are you doing the things you like? Is there any part of ownership you're like, I'm happy I don't have to meet payroll? Like, what about your new role excites you? Do you miss anything from, we'll call it pre-March 2022?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the thing that excites me the most is just seeing the company continue to grow. And
Hmm.
when we sold in 2022, it felt so good to tell the team. We had about 50 employees at the time.
Yep.
It felt good to say, hey, there's not going to be any layoffs.
Yep.
We're actually investing. We're going to be hiring. And so just seeing the team grow and flourish over the last
Hmm.
4 years been very fun to watch. But then also I've just enjoyed the M&A aspect of
Hmm.
this role, and that's your background, so you can
Yes.
appreciate this. But just being able to, go out and identify the right companies to to sort of join forces with Career Minds and look for the right companies, the right culture, the right products that come into the fold has been really a fun journey. And, it's allowed me to get more experience in areas that I've not had. So my day to day is, around, I travel quite a bit. I get
Hmm.
to go overseas, and in fact, I'm heading to Europe next week that I'm excited about for some business meetings and opportunities. But yeah, I'm sort of excited about that, and I have an amazing team that runs the business, and
Yeah.
I have my hand in that pretty regularly as well. I would say the things that I miss is just the scrappiness of just being
Yeah.
able to do what I want to do when I want to do it.
Yeah.
As a company that has grown pretty significantly over the last 5 years, there's a lot of infrastructure stuff that we're
Hmm.
bringing into the business and really try to maintain the culture of Career Minds. But I just miss that, hey, if we want to spin up this, let's just do it. We don't
Yeah.
have to go through some formal process to evaluate, like, an ROI or a business
Yeah.
case or justify something.
Yeah.
But I'd say that's what I miss. Thanks for having me.